Well, let's get this started. This safety training is meant to be covering the annual training topics. Every year we go through annual training topics. If you were unable to attend the training that we held earlier in January, this training will meet that obligation. You should have been given a questions form to go along with this training. In order to complete this training and get credit for doing so, you need to complete the questions form. If you don't have a questions form, stop the video, go see your supervisor and get this form. The topics for this training are the required annual training topics that we go through at the beginning of every year. The AWARE program, the Employee Right to Know program, bloodborne pathogens, and personal protective equipment. What we're covering today is not meant to be all-encompassing, but an introduction and/or a refresher to these topics. More in-depth training will be provided periodically throughout the year. If there are any questions that you may have with regards to any of these subjects or anything regarding your safety, please reach out to your supervisor, or you can always get a hold of myself. You are always welcome to call, text, email me with any question you may have, or your supervisor. Remember, your safety is your responsibility. Start with first question, a very important question, and that is, where do you report an incident? Incidents need to be reported, all incidents reported. An incident isn't just an accident that results in an injury. An incident is an occurrence, a condition, or a situation that has arisen in the course of your work that has resulted or could have resulted in an injury, illnesses, damage to health or damage to facilities, or any other property. These things need to be reported. Where do you go and report an incident? Our first topic of this training is the AWARE program. The AWARE program stands for a Workplace Accident and Injury Reduction Plan. This is a requirement of the state of Minnesota's safety and health rules and regulations. All employers, with some very few exceptions, need to have an AWARE program. Those employers that have an exception to this rule are found in the North American Industry Classification System. And on this slide, you'll see the NAICS codes. All industries are given a code. So if they're on an exemptions list, you do not have to have an AWARE program. The AWARE program is generally the safety and health program of the city or the utility. The state rules require that the AWARE program has all of those elements that are listed on the left hand of that slide there. Our AWARE program has the elements that are listed on the right hand side of the slide. These elements are integral to our safety and health program. So they're general rules by which we must follow when we're working. So what does all that mean with regards to the AWARE program? Who's going to be responsible for implementing the plan? Those things get spelled out directly in that plan. This isn't something that administration or management is forcing upon employees. It's something that everybody must work together to participate in. We want to know about any of the hazards that are a part of our work. We want to identify them, we want to check them out, and we need to control them. There are many different methods by which we can control hazards. How are we going to take to inform everybody about the AWARE program and about the safety and health program? What contents do we have with regards to our safety? When we have incidents or accidents that occur, how are we going to go about investigating them? And just as importantly, all of the rules that we have with regards to our safety, how are those going to be enforced? In other words, a disciplinary procedure. Question number 2 on your form. You discover a hazardous condition. What do you do? In other words, if you've discovered something that you feel is unsafe, it's a hazard to your safety or your coworker's safety, what are you going to do? What do you need to do? Next program, the Employee Right to Know program. The Employee Right to Know program is just what it says it is in its title. Spells out that employees, you, have the right to know about hazards that you're going to work with. In Minnesota, we call it the Employee Right to Know program. In federal OSHA, they call it hazard communication. There are some parts and pieces to hazard communication that are classified under the global harmonization system. These are all working together for hazardous substances. In the Employee Right to Know program in Minnesota, Minnesota spells out 3 different general categories: hazardous substances, harmful physical agents, and harmful infectious agents. Hazard communication and global harmonization are directly related to hazardous substances that we may be exposed to in our workplace. As a means by which to know about the hazards related to hazardous substances in our workplace, we have information that is available to us through safety data sheets. Safety data sheets are the information regarding all of our chemicals in our workplace. You need to know where the safety data sheets are. On the safety data sheets are 16 different sections that spell out the hazards associated with the chemicals. Another means by which you get to have the information about hazardous substances is on labels. We want every container with every chemical to have a label on it. Everything needs to be labeled. If we're going to move chemicals from one container to another container, we need to label it. On this slide, you see two different secondary container labels. One's called an NFPA Fire Diamond, that's at the top, and one is called an HMIS system, or Hazard Material Information System. We use these labels in order to put on and pass along information to secondary containers. On the safety data sheets, there's a section on there that tells you whether an eye wash station is available. Where is the eye wash? Do we need to have an eye wash station available to us when we're working with these chemicals? There's a section on there about personal protective equipment. Personal protective equipment can be very specific to a chemical, in particular our hands. There are different types of gloves. There are different types of respirators. There are different types of eye protection. The personal protective equipment section on the safety data sheet spells out the requirements of the personal protective equipment necessary when working with these chemicals. There's a first aid section. What happens if there's an exposure? Do you need to call the ambulance? How bad of an exposure is it? Are there first aid measures that you can take? Add water, don't add water, rinse with water, don't induce vomiting. That gets all spelled out in a first aid section on that safety data sheet. Where do you store the chemicals? Some chemicals have special storage requirements. They can't be mixed with other chemicals in the same container, in the same storage cabinet. You need to know the storage requirements. All that information is on that safety data sheet. What is an Ajax? Well, an Ajax goes like this, and perhaps you've heard the story. When my children were little, and that's the quadruplets, when they were little, they were not very adept at using knives and forks and spoons to eat. So this is when they're about 1.5, 2 years old. Well, they were eating spaghetti, And when you feed 2-year-olds spaghetti in a high chair with spaghetti sauce on it, it turns the high chair trays orange. Well, in order to clean 4 high chair trays at one time, you use the biggest sink you've got called a bathtub. I came home from work one day and I walked through the house and I could smell something. And I asked, what was that smell? And I was told, well, what do you smell? I said, it kind of smells like bleach, but I wasn't quite sure. And then it was, well, I'm washing the high chair trays. Well, what are you, and I asked the question of, well, what are you using? Well, I was using bleach. And I said, well, that doesn't quite smell like bleach. Did you use something else? And I was told, yes, I was using Ajax dishwashing liquid soap. And I looked at the Ajax dishwashing liquid soap bottle, and sure enough, right there on the label, it says, don't mix with bleach. And so I had asked the question, do you know what's in this? And the answer I got back was, well, yeah, it's an Ajax. I don't quite know exactly what an Ajax is, but apparently they're in dish soap, and more importantly, you can't mix them with bleach. Point is that the information that we need to keep ourselves safe is on the label, and we need to use those labels accordingly. Who would have thought that something as benign or as felt as benign as dish soap could be almost detrimental to people's health? If the amount of bleach and the amount of ammonia would have been differently combined, there could have been a whole bunch of sick people in my house. In the Employee Right to Know program, there's a section called Harmful Physical Agents. Minnesota's rule lists 4 physical agents that you, as employees, should you have an occupational exposure to these physical agents, you have the right to know about them, where the exposure is, and how to be protected from that exposure. First one, radiation. It actually gets listed as 2 physical agents, ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. And you can see on this slide that everything to the right is considered ionizing radiation, and it's the wavelength that we start to look at with regards to that exposure. Ionizing radiation can do more damage to the body than non-ionizing radiation. Physical agent is heat, or the lack of heat, thus cold. When there's an occupational exposure to heat or cold, we want to protect ourselves. Some industries, some plants have an extreme exposure to heat, a foundry, for instance. Some industries have an extreme exposure to cold, such as food processing, where people are working in freezers all day. We get our exposure from the environment for the most part. And so we want to do our due diligence to protect ourselves from the elements of the cold and the elements of the heat in the summertime. The last physical agent is noise, harmful noise. We need to protect our hearing. General rule of thumb says that if you have to raise your voice in order to carry on a conversation, then the area is too loud and you need hearing protection. We can also use a sound level meter to assess the area to determine if there's an exposure greater than 85 to 90 decibels. If the exposure is greater than 90 decibels, then we need to have a hearing protection, whether that's muffs or plugs. And then we put signs up for that area to say that we need to have hearing protection when we're in that area. Pieces of equipment will also have a pictogram on them, such as you see here, with a person having earmuffs on. All of those situations that arise, you see a piece of equipment with that pictogram on it, or you see a sign hanging on a piece of equipment or in an area, you have to wear hearing protection. The noise levels are too high. Harmful physical agents is also a part of the Employee Right to Know program. Harmful physical agents are less of a concern of ours in our workplace because we don't have necessarily an occupational exposure greater than what the general public has. In many instances, there's a big list, an inventory list of the different infectious agents that, should we have an occupational exposure to them, we need to take and have the training and the protections necessary to protect ourselves from those infectious agents. Recently, we went through the coronavirus, or the COVID. We had protections, we had infection control, we had personal protective equipment. We had rules, we had administrative controls in place to protect ourselves from an exposure to the COVID. We really get into our infectious agent exposure is through the Bloodborne Pathogens Program, and this is a completely and separate program within the rules. Federal government implemented the Bloodborne Pathogens Program. The Bloodborne Pathogens Program deals directly with HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. At one time, there was a statistic that was floating around that said that there are more carriers in the United States of hepatitis C than there are of hepatitis B and HIV combined. Now, we can get into and do some very specific discussions about any one of these bloodborne diseases and their danger, if that's a word that we wish to use, to us. There isn't a vaccine for hepatitis C, or I should say, there isn't a vaccine that's available to us via our employer. There may be a hepatitis C vaccine out there, but as of right now, the expense associated with it says that not very many people are going to be having that hepatitis C vaccine. There is no vaccine for HIV. There are prophylactic measures to take to prevent somebody from getting AIDS after being infected with the HIV virus. But there is a vaccination for hepatitis B. If you have an occupational exposure to bloodborne pathogens, the employer is required to offer to you the hepatitis B vaccine. You can choose to accept the vaccine or to decline it. If you change your mind, you're always welcome to get that vaccination paid for by the employer. The exposure means that you're exposed to blood, body fluids, or body parts as a normal part of your job duties. We practice universal precautions. Universal precautions are an infection control procedure whereby which we treat all blood, body fluids, and body parts as if they're containing or infected with all of the bloodborne viruses and bloodborne diseases that we talk about. Exposure can happen by getting it into the air, and it can touching our mucous membranes. We can inhale it in. We can be exposed by having non-intact skin, meaning that you have an open wound and you get blood or body fluids into that open wound. But most commonly is through sexually transmitted diseases process or through the sharing of needles. When we have to clean up any blood or body fluids, we use a bleach and water combination. 10 parts water to 1 part bleach. We disinfect the area with the bleach and water. The hepatitis B vaccine is available to those employees that have an occupational exposure. The whole idea is if you're going to be responsible to clean up blood or body fluids or body parts that you cover up, you wear rubber gloves. After you've got done cleaning up, then you dispose of the gloves and you take care to wash your hands according to the proper procedures, which is a minute of soapy water with your hands running through it. Question number 3. Do you know if you're eligible to be offered the hepatitis B vaccine? If you do not know, if it's unknown if you are eligible, see your supervisor. Personal protective equipment. In the AWARE program, we talk about controlling hazards that are identified. In our industry, we use personal protective equipment on a daily basis. Personal protective equipment covers us from head to toe. We have eye protection, we have safety glasses and safety goggles. We have face protection, which is face shields. One must go with the other. If you're grinding on something and you're provided a face shield to grind with, you need to have eye protection underneath it. Hand protection, there's many different types of gloves that we can use to protect our hands. Know what type of glove you need for the hazard you're working with. Head protection. Hard hats are required to be used when there's the potential of bumping into something or having something fall upon our head. Foot protection, safety-toed footwear. When there's the possibility of something rolling up or falling onto our feet. Body torso protection takes many different forms. Chainsaw chaps, high visibility vests, welding leathers. Hearing protection, ear muffs and ear plugs when we're in noisy environments. If you don't know how to use ear plugs, let me know. There's a special type of process whereby which the expandable foam earplugs need to be inserted into your ears. Fall protection when we're working from heights. We have to have fall protection on, which includes a fall arrest system so that we don't come to a sudden stop. It arrests our fall, it breaks our fall. And respiratory protection. If we're breathing or working in an environment where there's a hazardous atmosphere, we have to protect our respiratory system, whether that means we use a particulate filter to filter out the particulates in the air, or whether we have to supply air to our system because the contaminants are too vast. Personal protective equipment is all in the name. It means that it's personal to you. You have to use it. You have to don it. Donning personal protective equipment means putting it on and wearing it. It's your job to take care of it. You're provided with personal protective equipment. It's your job to inspect it. It's your job to maintain it, and it's your job to get it replaced if it needs to be replaced. When we talk about hazard controls, personal protective equipment is the last line of defense. We did not eliminate a hazard when we wear personal protective equipment. The hazard remains in existence. If you don't have personal protective equipment on, you have no protection against that particular hazard. Therefore, it's your job to wear it, to use it. Question number 4. How do you get your personal protective equipment replaced? If you've been provided personal protective equipment, where do you go? Who do you see in order to get a replacement? What happens if you haven't gotten any personal protective equipment yet? Is this the same person that you go and see to get some? Remember, many tasks can be performed by unsafe acts and unsafe behaviors. In other words, just because we haven't had an accident doesn't mean that it's a safe procedure. There's many things that can happen. We don't want safety to be thought of as, well, he's lucky today. It's not a part of the process. Our safety is important through this. Safety isn't just a slogan. It needs to be thought of as a way of your life. What is safety? Well, safety means that you're protecting you, yourself, and your coworkers, identifying the hazards, protecting yourselves accordingly. Do the right thing all the time. We want everybody to come to work with all of their body parts, and we want everybody to go home with all their body parts. Safety isn't just a, well, I have to do that at work thing. Safety should be an all the time thing. If you get injured at home and you lose time away from work, it's non-productive time, regardless of where that injury happened. You lose time away from work, it's non-productive time. An injury is an injury is an injury. Work safe all the time. Again, if you have any questions, any answers, any comments about anything related to the safety program, please, by all means, let me know. My telephone number is right here, 218-280-0823. Call me, text me, shoot me an email if you've got a computer. We'll do our level best to get an answer as soon as we can. Last question. Who's the safety guy and how can I contact him? Thanks again for taking time to listen to my little sermon or speech here. Please do not hesitate to get a hold of me if you need to. Thanks.